Hey, this is Ben DeCastro, and you are listening to the amazing, the phenomenal, the sensational Bartholomew Town Best of 2019. And he did not pay me to say that.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
All right, here we go. The best of 2019 here on the Bartholomew Town Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Bartholomew. Welcome aboard as we count down the top 19 episodes of the year. Folks, you've heard me talk about Urban Green's Co-op Market over the last few weeks, and if you haven't had a chance to make it out to the store yet, now's your chance before the end of 2019, new decade approaching. Take your grocery shopping to the next level, more exciting, more local, more healthy, just a better experience than what you're probably used to right now. Now, Urban Greens, it began as a buying club in 2000 with just 22 members. Now, it includes over 1,900 members, with the market on Cranston Street in Providence as the central hub of the co-op. Now, they're proud to support the health and well-being of the greater Providence community with events including CPR workshops, composting workshops, cooking classes with Paul Roselli, and much more. Now, you don't have to be a member of the co-op to shop there, but while you're there shopping, why not ask about membership and all the great perks that come with it? Urban Greens Co-op Market, located at 93 Cranston Street in Providence. They've got a parking lot. They're right off 95, right off Route 10. Urban Greens, 401-273-0362. Urban Greens Co-op Market in Providence. All right, so here we are with Gabriella Haase on, it's December 30th. We are closing in on 5 a.m. tomorrow, which is when this podcast has been released, if you're hearing it right now. And today, we're going to be in the countdown of the top 19 episodes of the Bartholomew Town Podcast here in 2019. Now, I'll say that the way that this was calculated, kind of a series of real and artificial metrics, I'll say. You know what I mean? One, we looked at the stats on the podcast analytics provided. We saw how many episodes were downloaded, how many were listened to, how many people listened to the entirety of certain episodes, and kind of came to some sort of mathematical version of events. Secondly, we took a look at the fan vote, which you, the listeners, contributed to. Bill@ripodcast.com. Some of you tweeted at me. Some of you actually contributed your votes in person, so thank you very much. And lastly, from my heart, from my gut instinct, as to which episodes had the most impact based on either my own feelings again or specific encounters with specific listeners and so on and so forth. So with that, I bring on now my co-host for this endeavor, a voice that'll be entirely familiar to the Bartholomew Town Podcast listener base, the one and only Gabriella Haase, who is the announcer. You've probably heard her say, "Welcome to the Bartholomew Town Podcast," 154 times.
Welcome to the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
There it is. Famous voice right there. Famous for many reasons, though, of course. Gabriella, the honors, please. Number 19.
Joe Paolino.
The Providence Journal, which was a major publication in those days, and other major companies, and all the heads got together and they bought the Biltmore and they made it, and they fixed it up, put millions of dollars in it, and they kept the thing open. Well, maybe we have to do the same thing with the Superman building. I don't want to see it knocked down, and quite frankly, I don't think it can be.
Joe Paolino. Now, this episode was fascinating because I have a buddy, Matt, in Newport, that I was playing a gig like 2 weeks after this episode came out, and we just finished the sound check, and it was a Wednesday night at the Parlor. You know, I do my regular thing down there in Newport, and the door opens up the venue, and all I hear is, "You got Paolino!" And I was amazed because, you know, what's been interesting.
Who said that?
Matt, my buddy Matt. And,
Okay.
you know, it's just really interesting how Joe Paolino, through his brand recognition, through his name recognition around the state, through obviously through his real estate enterprise, essentially, is just a household name of sorts, especially for like inside baseball kinds of people. And as the year went on, you know, it's interesting because, of course, I was on his television show, and that was fun. But most recently, he was on with me on WPRO when I was filling in just a couple of days ago. And he's very much a contender, if you will, someone who's thrown his hat into the ring to be governor of Rhode Island, which is interesting. And I mean, you heard that interview, Gabriella, and you've heard them all.
Can we call Paolino an influencer?
Ooh,
Do
I
you
think he
know-
would certainly appreciate it if you did.
Number 18, Naomi Chomsky.
Naomi Chomsky. Yes. Yes, indeed. Fascinating episode. Naomi Chomsky, for listeners who haven't heard this episode or aren't familiar, a drag performer that was kind of in the middle of the drag queen story hour controversy.
I remember.
It all blew up, and like suddenly like this very wholesome activity of reading to children becomes like this big thing.
There was basically pushback on drag queen story hour. And, I think that was particularly fascinating because it's something that I know you have experienced working with that group in the past in Brooklyn and in Newport. And for me, I was really surprised that, I wasn't surprised there'd be pushback. Just like surface level, there's always going to be people who are just like super uncomfortable with anything that's kind of outside their norm. But I was surprised, I guess, that the library, the Rogers Free Library, canceled the event at first and caved to that pressure. I thought that for a library to cancel a drag queen story,
Yes.
that was really bad, and really against what you would expect to see an institution like a credible library present. Unfortunately, it was ultimately resolved, but
I loved working with Drag Queen Story Hour. It was amazing to watch the children asking questions, them talking about dress up and playing dress up, and just seeing education and purity, the purity of,
it's entertainment as well. At a basic
Absolutely.
level. You want to assign, if it's convenient for a certain narrative, you want to make it into this sort of social justice warrior type of thing, but it's actually based on entertainment, edutainment. Fundamentally, it's not a shtick in and of itself, and I think a lot of people wanted to demean what the experience was into this other thing than it actually is. Now, there's always going to be cynics, there's always going to be skeptics, there's always going to be people who are on the extremes of both sides of any kind of conversation, right?
hopefully not always.
Number 17.
Linda Borg.
Linda Borg. I love Linda Borg. Linda Borg is the Providence Journal's education reporter. She's actually been on twice. She was on recently with Paul Zangari of WPRO for the best Rhode Island news stories of 2019 episode. But Linda Borg is just one of those reporters that's kind of like a reporter's reporter. I don't know. She's just always been there, very reliable. Doesn't necessarily publish in this age of content being sort of like constantly published on Twitter or daily content, which is quite valuable, and there are people doing amazing work in that regard. Sort of more, big picture, long-term journalism. But she's also just a cool person that I love spending time with, And
There's like a self-hate thing going on in Rhode Island that I've never seen anyplace else, and I've lived in a number of different places. But I think Rhode Islanders need to give ourselves a little pat in the back. We're never going to be Boston. Fine, we can be something different.
her perspective, for example, being able to compare Massachusetts education to Rhode Island, having that long view. A lot of people are focusing on education now. She's been there and able to take a bird's eye view on some of these topics. Apples to oranges in some case, Mass to Rhode Island, but not in every case.
Absolutely. She's a reference in the topic. And I think that if you want to understand a little bit more of the intricacies of education in Rhode Island, you should definitely listen to this episode.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Number 16, my friend.
College Democrats of Rhode Island.
Yes.
We're taking a comprehensive view to try to get as many folks engaged as possible in the process and teach folks that it may seem intimidating at first, politics and government, but everybody involved is just a person. And, if you want to get involved, you can get involved. So let's make sure you can do that.
This was a fun episode because we had a panel discussion, which is something we're going to be doing a lot more of in 2020. I had Brown University's Rose Lang-Maso, Bryant University's Quentin Long, and the University of Rhode Island's Andy Boardman from the College Democrats. In full disclosure, We tried to set up a college Republicans interview as well. It just never worked out. We were never able to get it organized. And the invitation's still there. Ladies, gentlemen of the Rhode Island College Republicans to come in, and any other student groups. Hopefully in 2020 we can make that happen. But this was great because it was good to get a sense that on college campuses, there's obviously always national political conversation on a college campus. I mean, you're always going to find that in even community college and, whatever, the smallest, the most remote countryside part of the United States. There's always going to be some political discussion. But what was interesting was how much of an interest there was in Rhode Island politics, awareness of the players. And I thought that was really fascinating that they had a great understanding of, the specifics that the Democratic Party in Rhode Island, for example, is fairly conservative relative to the National Party in a lot of senses in terms of the main players and so forth. They understood that. I thought that was fascinating. Now, Gabriella, you're a student at the Rhode Island School of Design, a senior, almost going to graduate. Congratulations in advance.
Almost going to graduate.
Almost going to graduate. Hopefully get all that, keep that painting moving. But give me a sense of on campus at RISD. What are the political discussions like? Because I bet they're pretty esoterical or world kind of view perspective. Are people talking Rhode Island politics on campus?
At RISD, I see people talking more about social issues and policy than denominational politics. There's a lot of just also investment of the school in regards to debating such topics. But artists in general are very critical. And actually, my last painting final, I had a classmate write a political manifesto.
But not Rhode Island. No one's talking about Nick Mattiello at RISD. No one's talking about the implications of Rhode Island politics inside
because
by and large.
Very rarely you have students from Rhode Island.
Number 15.
Mayor Elorza.
Jorge Elorza. Now, you were here the day that Mayor Elorza came with his wonderful staff. And
I was cooking.
What's that? You were cooking?
Yeah, I was cooking.
What were you cooking? What were you cooking
Probably,
the day that Elorza came over your house?
I think I was cooking Brazilian food, actually.
Wow. Awesome. Well, the thing about Mayor Elorza that's fascinating is that I've had the opportunity to be at a lot of his press conferences this year. I've been able to see at some level, and certainly monitor the Providence administration, the executive experience there, which I do believe they have done a good job of modernizing and really trying to capture and encapsulate the city's various, strongest attributes, I guess. It's interesting to see Providence, living here and where a lot of we're here in Elmwood, the loft out here in Elmwood, and living out here in Elmwood as well. It's interesting that we do feel this sort of disconnect. I don't know if you feel that. You like me, we go into downtown pretty regularly, if not every day. You go for school. There's a disconnect here, though. That's not on Mayor Elorza, but it's interesting to see that, as we kind of enter a new decade, and you wonder what his priorities are and how that is going to be more and more narrowed going in. You think into the future that'd be a main goal, a priority of sorts, based on some of his hopes for pre-K and various programs that would allow for a little bit more equity, I suppose.
But the people who have lived here, grown up here, and are most invested in Providence aren't able to partake in that progress.
Right. The gentrification train essentially pushes everyone further out, and potentially, you have a situation like Brooklyn or in many cases Newport now. I think Providence is ripe for, we were talking earlier off air about the megapolis, if you will, with Pawtucket and Central Falls, potentially the train contributing to an expansion of the city, if you will. But that's not Providence proper. That doesn't keep people renting or living in the city and purchasing homes here. Do you feel like Providence proper needs to focus on retaining its residents now, or are you comfortable with people living in the region but working in the city?
Well, I mean, I want to keep people in the city. I definitely want to keep our folks in the city. And I don't know, there's an identity that comes along with it.
I see the disconnect. I think disconnect the disconnect is a structural social problem in Rhode Island in general, but it gets very, very evident in Providence. It feels like the city is a bunch of, or a few bubbles, made of a few bubbles, and it not very often people are interacting. And I miss that. Personally, I've always grew up in big cities, and, I miss that from New York, where I think the homeless people were a part of them, as part of the Matrix, as the famous entertainment people or the Wall Street people. But it's interesting because a PVD Fest, like I feel very inspired and excited when it's PVD Fest because of how that drastically changes. And I just wish it wasn't just a party. I wish that somehow PVD Fest drew some kind of was inspiration for some kind of project that maybe brought people together like that.
Well, I mean, it sort of like sets the tone for a vision for what Providence could look like if you had that sort of activated public space that was fully, utilized citywide on a regular basis. That is a vision for what it could look like, a utopia version of Providence in some ways. Now, there's always going to be detractors. Someone's going to say, someone fired a gun into the air. There's always going to be detractors on the creative side. People I heard, we, of course, did PVD Fest. We did Bartholomew Town Live, which was so much fun. We had Silverteeth and the Z-Boys and Randy Robbins and, just a great event with music. And we also had Secretary Gorbea and Scott McKay, Two Hawks, Sabina Council President Matos. I mean, it was a full-on experience for us, and we had a great time there. But I've also heard people say, "Hey, look, our set got canceled." So it's an event that is in the works still. They're working out the kinks. But I agree with you, PVD Fest, and that is something in the episode with Mayor Lors that was front and center. PVD Fest is certainly an interesting, something to consider as a model for what the activation of downtown Providence could be if done well. And of course, it wouldn't necessarily take all that much time to do. It would just take the resources.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on. Number 14.
Two Hawks.
In my opinion, and it's not that they're totally to blame, but I'm looking at it from a professionalism standpoint and the fact that people get paychecks. So my first attention is to the teachers and admin, because I'm saying to myself, as a professional in a profession, I don't see any other profession where you can be unsuccessful for 25 years and then give excuses why there's no success, keep getting training. I'm just imagining if my mechanic kept messing up my engine.
Ray Watson, Two Hawks. Now, this is a man that I have a ton of respect for, and we actually did an episode, a brief, we did the Providence, the PVD Fest live interview, and then we did the big deep dive here on the pod. I guess the real big takeaway from that episode, of course, is looking at Rhode Island history as including indigenous history, which is something, having grown up in South County myself and in Rhode Island and so forth, I've always kind of felt a longevity to the geography, the physical space that was longer than the historical narrative that was presented, that kind of dates back at even the most extreme, in the most extreme cases, to like the 1400s, where people would suggest the Vikings were here in Newport or something. The idea is that, Two Hawks and others are advocating for a more proper look at Rhode Island history that includes thousands of years of indigenous history and just incorporating that into our current narrative and understanding where we sit in there.
Yeah, I totally agree that history needs to be revised. It's been told by a specific group of people, and we should include the facts. We should make it accurate, and it's very important to everyone to understand who we are now.
Number 13.
Providence City Archives.
Yeah, Shana Weintraub. And you know what? I hope they're doing well over there, because there was some flooding that, evidently impacted the archives.
Once I found that history can be what you make of it, and you can get really excited with it, that's when I started liking it.
Now, the Providence City Archives I'm giving them the win here. Again, very good numbers. A lot of people were very interested in this episode. And I think the reason why, compared with, like, for example, the state archives, which we also did an episode with earlier this year, the city archives are doing this amazing work on Instagram and Twitter through Shayna Weintraub inside the city archives. This great social media work that's really bringing Rhode Island history, Providence history into people's purview that would otherwise never probably take that time or have that curiosity, making it into contemporary humor, contemporary entertainment in an organic way, and tremendous Instagram account, and a great following, as evident by the performance of this podcast in terms of numbers. Now, my gut instinct as well is I just like the idea of talking about Rhode Island history and the fact that we have so many pieces available to survey where we came from in terms of our modern day American history here in Rhode Island. Now, you and I, we went to the state archives, had a similar experience with Secretary Gorbea touring and just getting a glimpse of some of those documents,
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. It's just fascinating to touch. The death books, the tangibly see proof of people's existence in this place hundreds of years before we've been here.
Number 12.
Dante Bellini.
And I think the first thing to solving this problem is for everyone to stop lying, for everyone to stop deflecting. And those people who I'm referring to know who they are. They need to stop deflecting and lying and just fix the freaking problem. Yep. That's what needs to be done. There is an abundance of talent in this state that will come together. All you have to do is ask them. They will come together and they will help fix the problem. But first and foremost, we have to make the schools safe and habitable for our kids. It is an utter shame. It is a travesty that the Providence schools are in the way that they are.
Dante Bellini. I love this episode because of, number one, it was a lot of fun to get the perspective of someone who wasn't, at the time anyway, in the media, wasn't in politics, wasn't specifically in industry and so on and so forth, but also had a statewide long-term understanding of some of the situations, particularly the Providence schools, and how to evaluate that. He made a comment on this podcast that was really important, that if you call upon the business sector, the contributors, if you will, in one way or another, the big time players in the state of Rhode Island, they will come in one way or another, come together and solve the problem if you give them the opportunity to. And I think that since then I have seen that the problems with this Providence schools, for example, the Partnership for Rhode Island and the Ernst & Young report that they commissioned, and just the smaller scale type of things that the partnership and others are doing as well, it does show that is where the Band-Aid and possibly, the triage, so to speak, and the long-term approach to how to solve Providence schools is going to come from contributors to this state who need that cycle, that wheel of education, workforce, etc., housing to run smoothly. But secondly, because it spawned a wonderful friendship with Dante Bellini that I love hanging out with and doing creative projects with, and doing some radio over, obviously a lot of radio over at WPRO, and we got some stuff coming up together in 2020, and also a lot of people. This truly did get a lot of hits as well, because a lot of people curious about someone who is sort of been behind the scenes, and I think that's been really cool on the Bartholomew Town podcast.
He is the one that took you to Need Donuts.
Yeah, good to have a friend that likes donuts. That's for sure. Number 11.
Lindsay Idaluca.
Yes, Lindsay Idaluca. Fantastic. Really, just an exciting new personality. Charismatic, right? Exactly. And it was one of the big things we talked about on this episode was being a woman in media and having people making comments.
It's definitely something to think about. And I actually always say this to interns or anybody that's looking to get into the business. I love all my interns, but I'll say to my interns who are young women, you're going to have to face sexual comments that you're not going to want online. You're going to deal with critiques on your body. You're going to deal with critiques on your makeup and your hair and things that, if somebody's watching a man give a television report, I would say 90% sure that they're not going to get an email about the color of their suit.
Making sexist remarks and trying to touch you or whatever it is. I mean, you've experienced that, I know, as a performer yourself.
As a woman in general,
exactly.
Since
So
I know.
riff on that. Give us, take us inside what Lindsay Ida Luca is talking about there, that extra challenge that women in media, and I'm using that term broadly, multimedia arts, theater, music, whatever, of course the news.
It's horrible. It's a real thing. If people just don't treat you as you're not a part of something or as if you know less about what you're doing, oftentimes they're going to sexualize you and make you feel very uncomfortable to be there.
Do you sense that there's been, because in the wake of the Me Too movement, do you sense that there's been any significant change, or is that something that was sort of just I don't want to say flavor of the week, that's not at all what I'm going for, but is that something that is slipping from some people's consciousness now, even just a year or so after that really broke?
I don't know if it's really slipping from people's consciousness as much as it's making a lot of people afraid of it. And I think it's very funny too to watch guys that have history of abuse also call out other guys as if they're not responsible or a part of it.
Wow.
Yeah, but I think that it generates conversation and it breaks up with the comfort zone and the people that end up doing things just because there's societal pressure. So I think that it's awesome. I think it's a great thing, and I hope that it develops into something more and more healthy and comprehensive, and in better ways, we'll find better ways to tackle the problem.
Coming up this Friday, the top 10 episodes of the Bartholomew Town podcast in 2019. Stay tuned for the conclusion of this episode. And remember, there's over 154 episodes waiting for you at ripodcast.com, bartholomewtown.com, or wherever you prefer to get your podcasts. Until Friday, we'll talk soon.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.